Our next speaker is Rob Cunningham. Rob is the Resilient Watersheds Programme Director Europe for the Nature Conservancy, which is a global environmental not-for-profit. Today, Rob will be talking about the Norfolk Water Fund, which is supporting farmers and landowners to integrate nature-based solutions into their business. Rob.
Thanks. Yes, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So I work for the Nature Conservancy, which might be an organisation you've never heard of, but I do have my roots very much in Norfolk. I grew up in North Elmham, a couple of miles from Bintry Mill, which is on the slide, and I'm really delighted to be here to talk about the work we're doing in Norfolk. What I wanted to do with this talk was kind of put the Norfolk Water Fund initially in the context of the work that Nature Conservancy is doing. So the Nature Conservancy, we're a global organisation. We're headquartered in the US. We have operations all around the world. We're kind of very large global NGO, really. But in terms of our footprint in Europe, it's very small. So we've got 6,000 members of staff globally. We've got about 60 in Europe. About 30 of those do conservation work. And I'm officially the only member of the conservation team based in the UK. And in terms of the work we do on water and resilient watersheds, which is all around creating kind of catchment scale, nature-based solutions programs that tackle water security, we've got global reach, and we have these flagship programs. And I'm really pleased to say that Norfolk is one of the global flagships. So it's really fun for me because I sit talking about the River Wensum and the Norfolk Broads and the work in Norfolk, and I'm kind of sitting in a room or in a virtual room with people who are working in the Amazon, people who are working on the Rio Grande, and kind of like, so it really Norfolk, it always kind of makes me feel slightly kind of, how does it stack up in that context? And we have this kind of like, we have this really broad global reach, and obviously we're working in very, very different kind of social, political, agricultural landscape systems. But at the core of our work is this very kind of simple kind of concept that, many of you will have seen diagrams like this before, which is essentially around, downstream users who rely on water services, so clean water for drinking, for irrigation, for industry, flood mitigation, those kind of services. That they provide funding and resources to land managers who protect and enhance those services through landscape intervention, so protection, restoration, creation of habitats. And so it's a really, really simple concept. And, obviously the devil's in the detail is around actually the tools that allow you to do that, the governance that allows you to aggregate the buyers and the sellers of those services, and the financial flows. And so whilst the concept is kind of common across all of our work around the world, how it's expressed is very, very different in those different contexts. And when we come to Norfolk, so the Norfolk Water Fund, the Norfolk Water Strategy Programme is developing, is a partnership between Water Resources East, who host the programme. They're the regional water resource planning body, and not-for-profit. They're not a statutory organisation, but they have backing from government, from the Environment Agency, from water utilities, and there are many stakeholders who are members of Water Resources East. Nature Conservancy ourselves, Anglian Water, and Norfolk County Council. And it was actually Norfolk County Council who originally put some funding behind this because of the risk, the kind of existential risk that water security poses to economic prosperity and environmental prosperity in the region. And these are the kind of the objectives of the Norfolk Water Strategy, around water not being a barrier to growth, delivering benefits. I won't read them all out, but you can see them there. So really kind of bringing together kind of environmental and economic and social interests, and making sure that water doesn't hinder those. So we went through a big process of supported by the Nature Conservancy's Nature for Water facility, a kind of technical, kind of internal consultancy, provided a lot of the technical background, and this is kind of linked very much to the work that Rich was talking about around nature-based solutions, kind of narrowing down what are the nature-based solutions that we think are most applicable in the Norfolk landscape. And we came up with runoff attenuation features, these leaky dams that trap water. So if they're targeted in the right place, they can infiltrate that water into the chalk, the underlying chalk strata, and support groundwater levels and low flows. But they can also tackle pollution by trapping sediment, trapping phosphorus. Riparian restoration, again, slowing the flow, trapping nutrients. Soil management practices, so the most obvious one of those being cover crops and arable conversion to grassland. And we could talk about arable reversion to grassland as a bucket of kind of that's how we modelled habitat restoration. But it could, there are other end points in terms of habitat restoration. And so those were the kind of through kind of stakeholder consultation and technical consultation, those were the nature-based solutions we kind of targeted. And then working with the Environment Agency, who were doing some regional groundwater modelling, we went through this process of modelling the flows of benefits from those nature-based solutions. So where in the landscape would you put them? Kind of then creating a portfolio, what kind of mix of those different measures might you want? And then kind of looking at under different scenarios, what benefits do you get from that? And from this, we had got a really detailed view of where in the landscape, particularly for groundwater and nutrients, where you put these features in the landscape is really critical. Actually, when we look at the River Wensum, groundwater infiltration is really is very, very variable because of the different soil types and the very complex kind of glacial deposits. So, some really detailed modelling about where those features would go. So that kind of tells us, yes, nature-based solutions can have a benefit, but then actually then we have to come and think about, well, what are the costs of that and what are the benefits of that? And we look at that in two different ways. We look at it in the kind of broad economic benefits. Does it make sense broadly from an economic perspective? So that's kind of thinking of the widest possible social, environmental, economic benefits. And so looking at costs, so things, cost to farmers, cost to land managers around, loss of agricultural incomes, and benefits in terms of pollution reduction, increasing in water availability, climate regulation, and within the Wensum and the Norfolk Broads, our target catchments, very much thinking about nutrient neutrality, which kind of came into being whilst we were developing the project. So how many houses do we unlock? And that's fine. So you come up with it. So you can do that kind of economic analysis, and that's brilliant. But what it doesn't tell you is whether actually you can get the revenues flowing that will fund those nature-based solutions. And so we also did a commercial case, so looking at the costs very much in terms of not just the physical features, but how do we run a program? How many staff members do we need? How much is it going to cost to man a water fund and maintain that in the long term? As well as the kind of, building in the cost to farmers and the kind of land values, the capital, the maintenance costs, thinking around a 30-year to, and when we're talking about nutrient neutrality, thinking into a 100-year kind of time horizon. And then thinking about revenues. And so we have all these amazing benefits and but where's the money going to come from? Who's actually going to pay? And in the Wensum and in the Norfolk Broads, our target catchments, the key revenues that are available to us when we were doing the modelling were nutrient neutrality and biodiversity net gain. Almost impossible to monetize and actually generate a revenue on the water resource benefits that we demonstrated, because nobody owns water in the environment, and so putting water into the groundwater, bolstering low flows, really difficult to then actually capture that value. It's definitely valuable to people, it's definitely valuable to abstractors, to the environment, but there's no revenue associated with it. And so we did that analysis, and these were the results. So we've got kind of the kind of figures around 3.7. So I should also say we took a £30 million portfolio. And we picked we could have developed a portfolio of £100 million, £200 million, or £5 million. But in discussion with Anglian Water, we thought £30 million sounded, when we were developing this, sounded like kind of where the AWINEP might land in terms of both the contribution that Ofwat might allow, the economic regulator, and the match funding. So we kind of just wanted a realistic sum of money. And so as you can see, we get really significant benefits in terms of water infiltrated into the landscape, nutrient reductions, and we get an overall economic return. So if we take all of those kind of both financial flows but also wider economic benefits, we get about 6.7 to 1 benefit cost ratio. Definitely worth doing from an economic perspective. There's also a reasonable financial return for land managers. It generates about £45 million worth of revenue to farmers, or land managers I should say. So there's a kind of financial viability test it passes as well. And if you use the QR code, you can download the full plan. So that was great. So we kind of, that tells us at a landscape scale that actually it really does look like it could be viable. But I'm very conscious that actually what works at a landscape scale and what works at a farm scale don't necessarily align. So we're also really lucky to work in partnership with the Wendling Beck project, and they were really helpful in terms of, they were entering into the world of biodiversity net gain and nutrient neutrality. The Nature Conservancy was supporting some of that early thinking. They were really a kind of test bed for us in terms of, is this going to fly? How would you integrate this into a farm business? And so and again, that's a successful business model. If you go to the Green Finance Institute, you can download the case study and read the detail of how their business plan was developed. And so we've kind of decided to go from this planning to operational scale, and we're developing tools to help us do that. We're integrating these into the work of the AWINEP, so working very closely with Anglian Water, and we've kind of developed some tools to help us do that. So we've got this particular screening tool. You can draw a line on a map anywhere in the Wensum or Norfolk Broads catchments, and you'll get a kind of output in terms of, well, what was our modelling suggesting in terms of nutrient reduction, BNG, wider kind of benefits. And that helps us screen those tools. What we're trying to work out now is, can we spread that out to the wider AWINEP area in partnership with Anglian Water to help them with their screening process. And the other really important thing is monitoring and evaluation. And we worked with, when I say we, I should say the programme team, Norfolk, led by Water Resources East, worked with the University of East Anglia to develop some really great monitoring guidance, which is being kind of used and referenced by TNC globally now, and it kind of gives you some kind of, from very basic through to very detailed, what kind of monitoring do you require for different audiences and different levels of precision and accuracy. And so we've moved from planning to delivery. That's where we are. Our focus now is really on kind of developing a pipeline of projects and feasibility schemes, so both on the ground and feasibility schemes, trying to test whether this grand kind of watershed scale plan really works for land managers on the ground in terms of the economics, but also in terms of the environmental outcomes. So that's where we are. Nutrient neutrality and BNG aren't going to fill all of the funding gaps, so we're really keen to look for, who are the other beneficiaries and working with partners, and there are other projects starting in Norfolk looking at other ways of using the awful word leveraging, my American colleagues like to use, but leveraging other kind of interests in the water environment, water security risks to fund some of this work. And we are working really closely with Anglian Water so to bring these programs together. One thing we do fund is feasibility. So if you've got a twinkle in your eye of an idea of a nature-based solutions project, but you need some feasibility work to really understand whether it's going to work or not, that's the kind of thing we can offer. So yeah, and just as a final thought, all the way through this, I've worked on the Wensum on and off for many years now, and this thing about, actually, it's not a question of whether we should or shouldn't do nature-based solutions. There is no viable pathway for the Norfolk Broads, for the River Wensum, and indeed most of the rivers in Norfolk. There's no viable pathway to recovery and to kind of without incorporating nature-based solutions. And so the question is, how do we fund them, not whether we should fund them or whether we should do them. And I think that's the thing that whatever else, all of the talk of markets and everything else which ebbs and flows with different government policy decisions, we've got to find a way to do this. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rob. That's fantastic.